He fought on the battlefield for 3 years, while I prayed in the temple for 3 years. He fought for the country, and I prayed for him. After 3 years, he returned victorious, bringing back a woman, calling her wife. He showered her with care, but treated me like a viper. He forgot that I am the emperor's cherished princess. And he is unworthy of me. Ding! RoyalStory reminds you to click the subscribe button in the bottom right corner to read the complete novel. The day Steve Dudney returned from the frontier, the capital of W country was packed to the brim. The citizens of the capital all wanted to see if the general of the Western conquest was as mighty as the legend said. I was with my father, the emperor, and my brother, the crown prince, on the city tower, watching the vast army approaching from afar. The emperor personally welcomed him, with the princess and the crown prince in attendance, an honor that officials could only dream of in their lifetime. Steve, clad in armor, paid his respects, then directly addressed my father. Your Majesty, I have fought for the country and ask for nothing in return, except for your Majesty to grant me a marriage, to fulfill my love. My heart leapt with joy, but then I saw him lead a woman forward from behind him. Charla saved my life several times at the frontier. She is an orphan, and I have no way to repay her but to offer her the position of my principal wife, to be with her for life. My heart felt as if it was being torn apart, my fingers tightly clutching my dress. My brother noticed my distress and coughed lightly. Steve Dudney, do not forget. I stopped my brother from speaking for me, and just smiled at him. Since the general has asked for this favor in front of all the officials and the capital's citizens, father, please grant it. My father nodded, indicating that rewards would be given later in the palace. Back in the palace, I had all the gifts Steve had given me in the past brought to Chongyang Hall and placed before him. I smiled and said, General Dudney, since you have found your beloved, the gifts you sent to me in your youthful ignorance should naturally be returned to you, one by one. Steve's face turned ashen, and Charla beside him looked lost. Since it's in the past, Your Highness, why not burn it all? It would save me the trouble of carrying it back to my residence. I laughed. Very well, let's burn it all then. Consider it a way to add excitement for the general and your future wife. I then took off the jade bracelet his mother had given me from my arm, walked up to Charla, and put it on her wrist. This bracelet was given to me by the old Mrs. Dudney. She said it belonged to the future mistress of the Dudney family. It's more fitting for you, the future Mrs. Dudney, to wear it. Charla smiled, her eyes curved with confidence. She shook her wrist at me. Thank you, Your Highness, for returning the Dudney family heirloom to me. I shrugged, not wanting to engage. But she smiled and said, I heard that Your Highness stayed in a temple for 3 years for Steve, praying for his safety and success. But Steve had been with me every day since half a year after he arrived at the frontier. If you had known, would you still have stayed in the temple? Seeing her dare to bare her teeth at me, I couldn't help but sneer. I am the princess of W country. It's my duty to pray for the country. As for you, following a man around without clarity, it's no wonder you're an orphan. After all, no one taught you better. Charla suddenly began to sob upon hearing this. Steve immediately embraced her, frowning with a cold expression. Your Highness, my wife doesn't seem to have offended you. It's you who's abusing your status and being arrogant. I smiled at him, then walked up and slapped him across the face. So this is all the general of the Western conquest amounts to. If I respect and honor you, you're a general. If I'm in a bad mood and don't want to respect or honor you, you're nothing but a dog of the royal family. Keep your woman in check. If she provokes me again, I can't guarantee I won't send her back to be a bandit's wife in some frontier den in a fit of anger. Steve said angrily, You're truly unreasonable. I shrugged. Steve Dudney, I've always been like this. I watched him leave with Charla in his arms, feeling only bitterness and weakness in my heart. My brother invited me to the Eastern Palace for a drink, and I didn't refuse. The Crown Princess, my sister-in-law, also gently advised me. Lily, Steve is not a good match. You should make plans for yourself. If you're upset, just let it all out. I raised my cup and smiled. We grew up together, and what I thought was mutual understanding turned out to be just a fleeting dream. From now on, I won't look at him with favor again. As my brother escorted me back to my palace, he paused and said, Lily, if you truly don't like him, I will seek justice for you. I shook my head. I know you care for me, but I, Lily Watsky, never bow my head, and I won't let you bow yours for me either. I stumbled back to my palace. I fell into a hazy sleep. In my dreams, I saw scenes from my childhood when I was spoiled rotten by my father the emperor. Children from ordinary noble families didn't dare approach me. Only little Steve would hold my hand and teach me calligraphy and how to play the zither. When I was 15, he held me in his arms as we rode horses in the outskirts of the capital. At that time, everyone thought Steve Dudney would be my consort. He even asked me to wait for him before he left for the war. 3 years have passed. Lily Watsky is no longer the mischievous princess. And Steve Dudney is no longer the Steve whose heart and eyes were full of Lily. And I have become a joke. On Steve's wedding day, it was said that he deliberately added quite a few dowries for Charla on the surface. My emperor father, intending to elevate her status, naturally bestowed many treasures as well. For a time, even though she had no parents and no status, she became the talk of the town in the capital. My empress mother and the crown princess, my sister-in-law, were intent on choosing a husband for me. Coinciding with the arrival of the Prince of L Country in the capital. Inexplicably, news spread that I was to marry into L Country as the crown princess. After court, Steve took a roundabout way to my palace. He told me directly, the Prince of Country is of a dissolute nature, not a good match. I completely ignored him and brushed past him, intending to pay respects to my mother. He grabbed me, making me look him in the eye. Your Highness, did you not understand what I said? I shook off his hand, dusted myself off, and said with a smile, what does it have to do with you? Steve frowned. You are a princess, noble and precious. Why subject yourself to a political marriage? I looked at his handsome face, darkened as if suppressing anger. I hooked my finger on his belt and gazed at him lovingly. What's this? Could it be that the general wants to be my consort? The general seems to have forgotten everything from the past, and naturally, I won't dwell on it either, because I think. I gently released his belt, leaving him bewildered. Think what? I smiled, adjusted his official hat, and said to him, I think it's dirty. I turned and left. Nanny Soward beside me whispered, Your Highness, why did you treat the general like this? If you're willing, perhaps the position of the general's wife could. I sneered. I, Lily Watsky, will never look back. I've never cared for the position of the Dudney family matriarch. Nanny Soward looked back and whispered, Your Highness, the general is still watching your back. I shrugged. Since ancient times, deep feelings rarely last. I only see it as a youthful folly. Now that he is married, I won't concern myself with the reasons. From this point on, there is no room for reconciliation between us. After paying respects to my mother, Vera Traynor, the daughter of the minister and my good friend, came to visit me in my palace. She first paid her respects according to custom, then shared the latest gossip from the capital. Dismissing the maids, she whispered, Did you know that both the 3rd and 7th princes of L Country are coming to W Country? They're both potential heirs to L Country. And there are even betting houses in the capital offering high stakes on which prince you will marry. I smiled. If I knew the outcome, I'd place a hefty bet myself and make a good profit. She hesitated before asking, What about Steve Dudney? I paused. We're strangers now, no need to mention him. 3 days later, the envoys of L Country arrived in the capital. Unexpectedly, I encountered an old acquaintance. Only now, he was no longer the little novice monk from the temple, but had transformed into the 7th prince of L Country. We shared a look of mutual understanding, neither mentioning our past at the temple. In the hall, the emperor and empress sat on their thrones, while my brother and I sat on either side. Many officials had brought their relatives today, as the presence of 2 princes of L Country meant a chance for their unmarried daughters to catch a prince's eye and bring glory to their family. After a few drinks, I went outside the hall for some air. After the heavy rain, water was still dripping from the eaves. And all was quiet except for a familiar male voice, Your Highness, it's been a while. I turned to see a handsome young man with a jade-like complexion, his jet-black hair neatly tied up in a crown. I never knew that the monk Jasper was actually the seventh prince of El Country. He smiled. Back then, you, accompanied by the ancient Buddha, had a temperament as calm as water. Now, you have become a bit more charming. But I hear that the Buddha didn't grant your wish, and your love interest turned out to be indifferent. I remained silent, and he whispered, Lily, why not take a look at me instead? Steve watched me and Jasper Ladner from a distance, approaching with a cold smile. Your Highness, please return to the hall with me. If others see this, who knows what rumors might spread. Jasper stood in front of me. You're just an outside official. Who are you to speak so condescendingly? Steve remained silent, staring intently at me. After a moment, Charlotte came out looking for him. Steve, it's cold and rainy outside. Let's go back in. He draped his cloak over Charlotte's shoulders and no longer looked at me. Jasper sneered, he's enjoying what's in the bowl while eyeing what's in the pot. Lily, if it were me, I would never let you down. I was stunned, hurriedly returning to the hall, and couldn't help but scold him. The former monk Jasper used to chant sutras daily. But now you dare to speak such frivolous words under the cover of night. If Buddha knew, he would surely punish you. His voice deepened. Lily, when I heard the news of Steve Dudney's triumphant return, my heart was filled with anxiety. If he had married you, it would have been my lifelong regret. I went to great lengths to request a mission to W Country from my father, all because of you. I ignored his words and returned to my seat. Steve's gaze was fixed on me. The Emperor bestowed wine upon the couple, but unexpectedly, Charlotte stood up. I am with child and cannot drink now. Steve's gaze fell on Charlotte's belly as the officials offered their congratulations. Amidst the chorus of well wishes, I severed my last thread of affection for Steve, raising my wine cup in a distant toast to him. After that day, the weather in W Country gradually turned cold, and after the beginning of winter, the first snow fell. Every winter, my mother would stay at Clear Spring Temple for half a month, and this time was no exception. I accompanied her along with my sister-in-law, the Crown Princess. Inside Clear Spring Temple, Raimai stood tall, and the eaves were covered with snow and ice. My mother knelt for a long time in the main hall. The incense burner was shrouded in mist, and in the depths of the purple smoke, I seemed to see a crisis. Several unfamiliar young novices glanced intentionally or unintentionally towards the hall where my mother stayed. When they came to the door of the main hall with swords, I pushed my sister-in-law and maids into the hall, holding my 9-section whip and standing at the door. Who are you? They did not speak, but the sharp-eyed guards saw the marks on the back of their necks. Your Highness, they are Soloro tribesmen. I sneered, dissatisfied with our Watsky family, yet only daring to attack the women. You're nothing but a bunch of petty thieves. Today, I will teach you a harsh lesson in this Buddhist sacred ground. The lead novice grinned viciously, then let's see how capable you really are. The guards and I fought desperately, but we were ultimately outnumbered. It wasn't until Jasper Ladner arrived with reinforcements that the situation turned from danger to safety. My forearm was cut by a sword. Jasper frowned, a royal temple, yet someone could still sneak in. The crown princess was frightened, her lower abdomen in pain. It wasn't until we returned to the palace that we learned she was 2 months pregnant. The emperor and crown prince were furious and ordered a thorough investigation. That group of Soloro tribesmen was eventually captured. They wouldn't reveal their mastermind. But I had ways to make them talk. My brother and I sat on high seats, looking at the group. The Soloro tribe in the western part of W Country was subdued by Ronald Dudney, the Marquis who pacified the country years ago. Recently, it seems they were dealt with again by our general of the Western Conquest, Steve Dudney. You didn't go after the Dudney family, but instead targeted our royal family's movements. A brilliant move of misdirection, but I wonder what relationship Steve Dudney's wife has with you? The man's eyes widened, but he remained silent. I didn't torture them, but instead pointed to the window and said, "It's all right, the time hasn't come yet. Wait until your goddess gives birth to a child, wait until she bears the Dudney bloodline, then I'll let her personally watch you die." Those people cursed me as venomous as a snake behind my back. But they still asked me, "How did you notice?" I sneered, "I am my father's right hand, managing the Chilan Pavilion for many years. Every move of the court officials is under my watch. As for that woman Steve brought back, I have my ways to investigate her thoroughly. Steve might be bewitched, might be blinded by the trap, but I, Lily Watsky, will not be. My brother and I left the place where the prisoners were held. He tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear. Lily, I'm afraid this play is about to end. I spoke calmly. The Dudney family has been conquering the western city for years, with deep-rooted connections. I won't be at ease until the tiger tally is in our hands. As for Steve Dudney, since he couldn't pass the beauty test, let him be content for a few more days. When he rejoices in having a son, when his dear father attacks the imperial city, we'll catch them like fish in a barrel. Won't that be more interesting? Jasper invited me out daily. The bet set in the gambling house some time ago had concluded. The third prince of L Country had no interest in me, but rather was quite interested in my close friend, Vera Traynor. Jasper invited me to appreciate plum blossoms. The wound on my forearm hadn't healed yet, and when I was getting off the carriage, he actually carried me down, making me blush. In the plum garden, he stammered, "Do you know about the betting pool in the capital? I bet on myself winning. I didn't expect my third brother wouldn't fancy you. I won a large sum of money, and now no one is competing with me." I spurted out the tea in my mouth with a pft. Turning around, I unexpectedly saw Steve and Charla. Charla's belly was slightly swollen. Steve embraced Charla but still spoke. "Your Highness, you're not yet married, but you're already hugging and embracing with a prince from another country. If His Majesty knew." I waved my hand. "Steve Dudney, don't forget your place." He left with Charla. Jasper blinked. "You're provoking him." I took a sip of tea. A heartless person cannot be kept, and a traitor to the country has only one path: death. Jasper looked at me seriously. "If I were to marry into W Country, it's not impossible." I spat tea all over his face. The day Jasper returned to L Country, the Dudney family welcomed a little young master. Charlotte gave birth to a son for Steve. The day I parted with Jasper, he secretly held my hand when no one was around. "Trust me." My father and I deliberately reduced the Imperial Guards protecting the palace by half, quietly waiting for that day to come. That day, I was combing my hair in my chambers when a maid came to report in a panic. "Your Highness, the palace has been breached. There are rebels." I changed into armor and went to the main hall to rescue the Emperor. Steve and his father, faces covered in blood, had gone berserk, shouting about purging the court. Seeing me blocking the door, Steve hesitated. "Lily, if my father becomes the emperor today, I will be the future crown prince." My relationship with Charla was just a transaction. I used her tribe to conquer the western city, and she used me to consolidate her tribal position. "Lily, come to my side. If I become the crown prince, you'll be my crown princess." Ronald Dudney frowned. "Lily Watsky, is your father in the hall? The palace is now surrounded by me. I advise you to surrender. I can still spare his life." I sneered. "Steve, you're not worthy." At my command, fireworks signaled, and the sound of hooves came from not far away. I smiled sweetly at the father and son duo on horseback. Have you ever heard of covet gains ahead without being aware of danger behind? Jasper came riding on horseback. Ronald was killed by an arrow. Steve's eyes were full of hatred. He tried to wound me with his sword but was disarmed by my 9-section whip. The whip lashed across his face, drawing blood. He roared. "Lily Watsky, this was all your trap." Jasper protected me behind him, and guards dragged Steve into the dungeon. Overnight, as the storm approached, I led my subordinates from the Chelan Pavilion to arrest all the officials in W Country who had responded to the Dudney family's call. The entire W Country was covered in a layer of eerie shadow. It wasn't until the second day, when the sun rose in the east, that the Dudney mansion was surrounded. Charla, carrying her young child, left the mansion. Seeing me on a white horse in full armor, she suddenly gave a desolate smile. "Lily Watsky, Steve once told me that you were incredibly intelligent, unparalleled in the world." I didn't believe it then. Those 3 years you spent in the temple were just biding your time, weren't they? I wonder if it was Steve who was indifferent to you, or if you were also indifferent to him. I looked down at her from my high position. Steve and I grew up together. I never regretted those years we spent together. It's just a pity that within the royal family, loyalty to the ruler comes before filial piety. And the welfare of the state takes precedence over personal feelings. From the day you arrived by his side, he and I were in a deadlock. She widened her eyes. You knew all along that he had someone else by his side? I looked at her eyes full of exhaustion, knowing well that she had developed genuine feelings for Steve. I looked at her and finally said the words that would overwhelm her. The biggest difference between you and me is that I would never rely on a man. She collapsed on the ground, breaking down in tears. The Dewdney family fell. And digging out this tumor of the Dewdney household brought out many other families once considered important ministers. It seems the capital will need some time to return to peace. Even if the entire W country needs to undergo a painful cleansing, I will not hesitate. If the root of the disease is not removed, endless troubles will follow. Jasper was waiting for me at the palace gate. He was dressed in plain clothes, looking like a young master from an ordinary wealthy family. A stark contrast to the decisive young man on horseback yesterday. I dismounted, and he looked into my eyes with a smile. Lily, you've won. I nodded slightly. I should thank you. If you hadn't agreed to help me, it probably wouldn't have gone so smoothly. Even that old fox Ronald Dewdney couldn't have imagined that I would join forces with L Country. He joked, well, when two foxes meet at the foot of Clear Spring Temple, they ought to accomplish something to make the encounter worthwhile. The child of the crown princess was born on the second day after the fall of the Dewdney family. The capo returned to peace, and even though undercurrents were still flowing, they were firmly under my control. My brother's illness was getting worse. Even in early summer, he needed to be wrapped in several layers of clothes. That day, the emperor summoned me. My brother sat beside my father, smiling at me. Lily, today is the day to fulfill your promise to your elder brother. The emperor stood up and looked out from the door of the diligent governance hall for a long while. Only after a flock of birds flew by did he turn back and slowly speak. Lily, if I were to entrust this empire to your hands, could you bring peace and prosperity to the entire W country? I dared not speak. At this moment, my brother, struggling with his illness, stood up. Lily, you've always had great ambitions since childhood. If it weren't for me, perhaps you would have long since become not just a princess, but the most brilliant crown princess of W country. I knelt down and promised, if father trusts me, I will certainly hold up this realm for the entire W country. On that day, under clear skies, I was decreed to be the crown princess of W country. And my brother's child was simultaneously named the future crown prince. My brother and his wife left the palace to travel the world and seek treatment for his illness. The Eastern Palace became my domain. A eunuch came to relay a message that Steve wanted to see me one last time before his death. I wore a bright yellow robe. When I arrived at the dungeon, I saw his face full of disbelief. You actually became the crown princess? I looked down at him without saying a word. Until the eunuch beside me kicked him. Insolent criminal! How dare you speak disrespectfully in front of the crown princess without paying respects? He began to laugh, and as he laughed, he started to tremble. Lily, my heart and eyes were full of you. Why did it come to this? If I had succeeded in my rebellion, I would have been the crown prince. What would have been wrong with you being my crown princess? If you were willing to be regent, I would have even been willing to rule this great empire with you. Lily Watsky, you never had me in your heart, did you? I spoke calmly. Steve, I am grateful for your companionship in our youth. But you were unwilling to be my consort because a consort cannot hold power, cannot achieve supreme military merit, and cannot satisfy your thirst for power. So during your Western campaign, you colluded with the goddess of the Soloro tribe. I don't want to delve into how much true feeling there was in your mutual use of each other. But you had a child together, didn't you? Steve's eyes began to flicker. He hesitated. When did you find out about? I crouched down to look him in the eye, gripping his stubbly chin, my tone turning colder. Naturally, I knew during the half year I was praying for you at the temple. Why didn't you confront me then? Why did you never question me? Steve, in your eyes. Was I always that naive little princess whose only wish was to wait for you to return victorious from battle so I could marry you? If you really thought that, you underestimated me. I am the only princess of W country. The blood of the Watsky royal family flows in my veins. The responsibilities I bear are far greater than you imagined. Steve crouched in the corner, looking at me as if I were some kind of monster. Finally, he asked in a small voice, "Did you ever love me?" I sighed. "Steve, when I volunteered to pray for you at the temple back then, I truly did love you. I hoped for your safe return every moment." Unfortunately, the Chelan pavilion in my hands held the secrets of many important ministers. As its keeper, I couldn't help but plant my own people in the Western Expedition Army. Steve, from the first day you and your Charla colluded, we were in a deadlock. Isn't it laughable for you to speak of love now? I walked out of the dungeon, breathing in the fresh air deeply. Steve was still shouting like a madman, "Lily, I truly loved you." The old nanny following me whispered, "Your Highness, his shouting might affect your reputation. Leave his body intact. Give him poisoned wine." Steve Dudney died. There were no more courtiers in the court. Perhaps there would be in the future, but I didn't find it frightening. Everything would be under my control. In just a few months, everything changed. My father intended for me to oversee state affairs while he spent his days tending to flowers and plants in the palace with my mother. And playing with my little nephew. Jasper and I hadn't seen each other since the day I was named Crown Princess. I only heard that he had returned to L country. When I thought of him, I occasionally felt a pang in my heart, always remembering how he rode to support me that day. The husband of the Crown Princess was destined to not be a prince from another country with hopes of inheriting the throne. I put aside my girlish thoughts and immersed myself in state affairs daily. Until that day, when a familiar voice rang out, "Your Highness, I hope you've been well." Looking at the figure outside the hall, I unconsciously felt my eyes redden. After dismissing the maids and eunuchs, I dared to ask, "Why have you come?" Jasper smiled. "I am no longer the 7th Prince of L country. I requested to leave the royal family, and my name has been removed from the royal genealogy. I am no longer Jasper Ladner, I am just Jasper." My eyes reddened, and he smiled, opening his arms to me. "Lily, I never cared about the throne. If it wasn't for wanting to have a status worthy of you, I wouldn't have returned to L country at all. When I first fell in love at the temple, I was punished by losing my surname and royal status. I am no longer Jasper Ladner, let me just be your Jasper." I ran into his embrace without any more worries. The news of the Crown Princess taking a husband spread through the streets and alleys of the capital. When my brother heard about it, he rushed back to the palace with my sister-in-law. Jasper's elderly father sighed that he had such a romantic son. Although the Ladner royal family had removed his name, they still loved him and sent cart after cart of rare treasures as his dowry. My mother and sister-in-law took charge of the wedding preparations. The fire-red wedding dress was embroidered with dragon patterns. Sitting in the bedchamber, I felt a bit at a loss. The old nanny carefully taught me some things about being a wife, which made me blush even more. She laughed and said, "It's been a long time since I've seen your Highness like this. Everyone in the capital says your Highness is decisive and iron-fisted, but you're still just a young girl after all." I smiled and asked the nanny to leave first. Suddenly, I thought back to that year at Clear Spring Temple. I held the secret report from Chelan Pavilion, my whole body trembling as tears fell like rain. In the corridors of the temple, only I was sobbing, accompanied by the rustling autumn wind. A pleasant male voice offered consolation. "Your Highness, only with a calm heart can one think clearly. Don't cry. Buddha's guidance is righteous. What your Highness seeks may not be predestined, but that can be a good thing too." From that day on, I followed Jasper and copied many scriptures. Every morning, I would chant sutras and pray with him. He knew I controlled Chelan Pavilion and had seen the many angry letters I wrote to Steve. Holding a blue lamp, his expression gentle, he said, "Does your Highness understand the principle of remaining unchanged in the face of change? You only need to act as you always have. Others will only see a calm lake surface, unaware of the undercurrents beneath. What your Highness needs to do now is to be the manipulator of those undercurrents." In front of him, I burned those unsent letters. He smiled, "Your Highness, you only need to wait for the right moment. A true ruler is like a hidden dragon or crouching tiger, not an impatient leopard. Having courage without wisdom is the greatest weakness. Until one winter night, he disappeared, leaving only a note. Don't worry about me, Your Highness. If I return to secular life, it must be for an extremely important matter. We will meet again. The next time I saw him, he was the seventh Prince Jasper Ladner of L Country. On the day we reunited, outside the hall. When Steve questioned me, he stood in front of me and passed me a note from behind. It read, "If you take action, I will support you with all my might." It wasn't until late in the night that I finally fell into a deep sleep. The moonlit night was entirely peaceful. My heart softened, my brow relaxed. It had been so long since I truly let my guard down. On the day of my wedding to Jasper, the entire capital was decorated in red. We rode on precious horses from the city gate all the way to the palace. At the palace gate, I held his hand as we walked on the red carpet. He held my hand, his eyes smiling. After paying respects to heaven and earth, and then to our ancestors and parents, we officially became husband and wife. A banquet was set in the palace. In the hall, amid the clinking of cups, it was finally just our wedding feast, with no other concerns. We listened to the officials' congratulations and watched the minister's distant well wishes. Until we returned to the Eastern Palace. His eyes were deep as he held my hand, unwilling to let go. The old nanny had specially lit pear-scented incense in the room, and a sweet fragrance drifted into our noses. He sat on the edge of the bed, lifted the covers to see the bed full of red dates and longan. And teased me, "Lily, what does this mean?" I said, "You know very well." He embraced me, the gauze curtains fell, leaving only a room full of romance. He fiercely held my waist. "Lily, you don't know how happy I am." I asked hoarsely, "When did you first start liking me?" He gently tapped my nose. On that day when the sunlight was just right, a lady stepped out of a soft sedan chair. She was noble and distinguished. At that moment, I thought to myself that I must cling to her to enjoy wealth and glory. I looked into his eyes seriously, and he stammered. "I came to Clear Spring Temple because I didn't want to fight for the throne, so I ran to a temple in W Country. Unexpectedly, I fell in love and wanted to go back to compete for the position of Crown Prince. If I won that position, I would have more right to stand before you, rather than as a mere monk. I didn't expect my little girl to have such great ambitions. I don't want that L Country throne anymore, I only want you." I hugged him tightly. "Jasper, I'm so happy it's you in the end." He held me, his chin resting on the top of my head, his smile warm. His hand caressed my hair. I suddenly looked up at him, and his eyes were filled with an unsatisfied look. I grinned mischievously. "Do you know, in the gambling houses of the capital, I once placed a large bet on you against the third prince. Now that I have you, I've also made a big profit. I guess I'm not at a loss." He was stunned. "When did you start having feelings for me?" I hooked my arms around his neck and pressed my lips to his. "Under Clear Spring Temple, perhaps you weren't the only one who fell in love. It was the 3rd year after my marriage to Jasper. I gave birth to twins, our children. My father had even less interest in court affairs, his heart and eyes full of my brother's children and my own. He handed over the throne to me early, wanting to take my mother and the children out of the palace to travel famous mountains and rivers. The old emperor of L Country followed my father's example, giving the throne to the 3rd prince early. My dear friend Vera Traynor became the empress of the L Country overnight. Under these layered relationships, the W and L countries grew even closer, our national power at its peak. My father wrote that when the old emperor of L Country heard that Jasper had a pair of dragon phoenix twins, he was eager to come and see them. Unexpectedly, after arriving, he even wanted to take the children back to the L Country. I smiled helplessly, but Jasper was spineless. He just laughed and said, "Let him take them back. Even if they go to the L Country, their uncle is the new emperor, and their aunt is the empress, who is their mother's dear friend. They won't be mistreated. Having someone to look after our children for us, why not? Besides, I want you to have more children." "Jasper, you're shameless." I remember someone saying she liked me being shameless. The rest of the argument was swallowed by his lips. I could only hook my arms around his neck without temper, afraid of sliding off the desk. Jasper's side story. When I first saw her, she was a little princess praying devoutly under Buddha's statue. She never missed morning and evening greetings, her handwriting was delicate. And she spent her days in the meditation room copying sutras. Until that day, I heard her wish, "I hope Steve Dudney returns safely." She was just a little girl praying for her lover's safety, but the next sentence startled me. She said calmly, "If he has other intentions, I pray Buddha protects W country, and I will end him with my own hands." I was a prince who had fled from the disputes in L country, used to intrigue and deception. But seeing the world-famous Chilean pavilion in her small hands at such a young age still piqued my curiosity. On a cold autumn night, I was sweeping fallen leaves in the temple when I heard someone sobbing. I couldn't help but approach. That was also the first time I felt compassion for a girl. I rarely spoke so much to her. "Your Highness, do you know that the principle of remaining unchanged in the face of change? You only need to act as you always have. Others will only see a calm lake surface, unaware of the undercurrents beneath. What your Highness needs to do now is to be the manipulator of those undercurrents. Your Highness, you only need to wait for the right moment. A true ruler is like a hidden dragon or crouching tiger, not an impatient leopard. Having courage without wisdom is the greatest weakness." I watched her strategize, saw her patience, saw how skillfully she utilized the Chilean pavilion. If she were a man, perhaps the W country empire would fall into her hands. My feelings for her gradually changed until I accidentally overheard her close friend talking about Steve Dudney. I felt a twinge of jealousy. People from the L country came to ask me to return. And my father even summoned me back to L country in the name of my deceased mother. I knelt before all the gods and Buddhas, and though dressed in plain robes, I confessed for the first time. I watched as the gods and Buddhas slowly opened my mouths in the night. I wished to return to secular life. I originally wanted to stay with the ancient Buddhas and not concern myself with worldly matters, but I broke my vows. I fell in love with a girl, yet she holds a lofty status. I repent here. Only with a status matching hers could I stand by her side again with a heart full of love. I left a note and departed from Clear Spring Temple. I recruited soldiers and maneuvered court politics in L country, while she waited patiently in the ancient temple. Finally, Steve Dudney returned victorious, and I knew the time had come. I came from the midst of intrigue, just to lend her a helping hand. For many days and nights, I wrote on my desk, "When you reach the end of the water, sit and watch the clouds rise." In the W capital, I watched her delicate hands move mountains with little effort. Saw her cleverly provoke Steve with her wit, watched her step-by-step walk towards the outcome she desired. Countless times I wanted to tell her, "Lily, don't be afraid, trust me." The day she received the edict and was named Crown Princess, she stood atop the city tower for a long time. I watched her receive the people's homage from a nearby tea house. It was time for me to make my move. To go to L country and shed this royal identity. To be just Jasper, hers alone. Perhaps losing that surname and royal status was Buddha's punishment for me, but I would gladly accept it. Lily, I will always protect you. Lily Watsky's side story. My father only had my brother and me as children. He loved my mother, a young and deep love, promising one life, one world, one couple, and never changed. In my youth, I was childhood sweethearts with Steve Dudney, the son of the Marquis of Dudney. I once fantasized that we could be like my father and my mother's, married and in harmony. The year I turned 15, he led troops to battle, becoming general of the Western Conquest. Before leaving, he asked me to wait for him. I packed my bags and went to Clear Spring Temple to pray for the country and for him. Half a year later, my Chilean pavilion sent a letter saying that Ronald Dudney and Steve Dudney intended to rebel, and even allied with the goddess of the Soloro tribe. The letter mentioned that the goddess shared a bed with Steve every day, looking like a young married couple. In my anger, I wrote several letters intending to denounce him. But Jasper stopped me. Jasper said that waiting for the right moment was the best strategy. To be the manipulator of the undercurrents beneath the calm lake surface. I put away my anger and returned to being the princess who wholeheartedly prayed for her lover. No one knew that I had already begun to strategize with my brother, just waiting for Steve to return and force him to reveal his true colors. I chanted sutras with Jasper every day. He was handsome, with sword-like eyebrows and star-like eyes, clearly no ordinary person. I couldn't help but look at him a few more times each day. However, later he left without saying goodbye, leaving only a note. He said we would meet again. 2 years later, we met again in the capital of W country. He had transformed into the 7th prince of L country, no longer the fair-faced young monk. He said to me, "Your Highness, I hope you've been well." My heart raced, recalling the rumors in the capital that the princess would marry a prince of L country. I found myself blushing. I tried to appear calm as we conversed. But Steve noticed us and he stepped in front of me, handing me a long note with his other hand. "If you take action, I'll support you with all my might." He truly helped me a great deal. I still remember how he rode in on horseback the day we surrounded the Dudney family. I thought marrying him might be a fortunate thing. But I always had a secret. On the night Jasper left Clear Spring Temple, I held that note and made a wish before Buddha. I hope Jasper and I can meet again. He sleeps beside me now, with our 2 children in their cradles. I think this secret must never be revealed to him, or his tale would reach the sky. Steve Dudney's side story. On the night Lily ordered me to drink poisoned wine, the jailers had me bathe and change clothes. A man about to die should at least look presentable. A sumptuous meal was prepared, along with a jug of poisoned wine. The head eunuch beside Lily watched me. "General Dudney, I have seen the cold realities of palace life. The crown princess allowing you to keep your body intact is already a kindness for old time's sake. You'd best be on your way soon." I suddenly remembered the delicate little girl I used to hold hands with as a child. She had climbed step by step to become the crown princess. Now she even held the power of life and death over me. Looking at the old eunuch, I couldn't help but ask, "Lily, will she end up with Jasper?" The old eunuch smiled. "I dare not speak of the crown princess's marriage matters." I drank the poisoned wine, the pain in my organs unbearable. Images flashed through my mind like a lantern show, each one about Lily. I had originally planned to overthrow the kingdom, become the crown prince, and make her my crown princess. It would have fulfilled my ambitions and allowed us to be together. When I knelt before my father, begging him to ask the emperor for a marriage decree, he sneered. "As a consort, you can't hold power, can't stay in the military camps, can't be a minister. Do you still want me to ask?" I knelt for an entire night, finally compromising the next day. I asked my father that when he ascended the throne and I became crown prince, to let me marry Lily as my crown princess. My father agreed. How foolish I was. Lily was heaven's favored child, how could she ever be content as someone's subordinate? I deserved this. It was all a fleeting dream. I failed her, and I failed myself.